The opinions expressed in this podcast are solely those of the participants and do not reflect the opinions or beliefs of Marshall University, Marshall University Libraries, the Department of English, the College of Liberal Arts, Marshall University Film Studies, or HerdCon. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Book Chats. And we are back at you again post HerdCon as of this recording. So, Meghan, did you survive HerdCon?
I did. It was very, very hectic, though.
Yes. Definitely, you deserve a good break after all of HerdCon.
I know you saw me when we were setting up the panels. I'm sure I looked completely frazzled.
You look much more rested now. I feel probably
very much so.
Take a few months before they have to start planning the next one, which I look forward to. So.
I'm already getting emails.
Oh yeah, never. It's quite an event. And how many years has it been going on now?
I think this was the sixth year, but technically the fifth HerdCon because we didn't get to hold it in 2020.
Yeah, for understandable reasons.
So we had it planned that year and just didn't get to. But that was before I was with the library.
Yeah.
It was before my time.
That's true. So anyway, obviously just wanted to give a shout out to HerdCon. They are the sponsoring organization, I guess. This would not be possible without the resources of HerdCon. And of course, before we get started, I do want to give our disclaimer because the opinions expressed in this are our own. So the opinions expressed in this podcast are solely those of the participants and do not reflect the opinions and beliefs of Marshall University, Marshall University Libraries, the Department of English, the College of Liberal Arts, or HerdCon, but we greatly appreciate them that they give us jobs, and we're happy to work for them. So we're going to, it's a little late for, as of this recording, it's a little past African American History Month, but we are talking about the good novel by Tananarive Due, and did I say the good novel? The Good House. It is a good novel, but we'll do. Meghan's going to do the bio, and I'll do the summary, and we'll go from there.
I'd also like to say us doing it outside of February just highlights that it doesn't need to be February to read Black authors.
Indeed. You can read, there are 12 months out of the year, and you could read African-American authors, Black authors, African literature, Afro-Caribbean literature any month of the year, and we encourage you to do that.
Absolutely. So I will introduce Tananarive Due. She is an award-winning author who teaches Black horror and Afrofuturism at UCLA. She's a leading voice in Black speculative fiction for more than 20 years. Due has won an American Book Award, an NAACP Image Award, a British Fantasy Award, and her writing has been included in the Best of the Year anthologies. Her books include The Reformatory, winner of the Los Angeles Times Book Prize, I apologize, I'm not sure exactly how to pronounce this word, Chautauqua Prize?
Close enough.
Bram Stoker Award, Shirley Jackson Award, World Fantasy Award, and a New York Times notable book. The Wishing Pool and Other Stories, Ghost Summer Stories, My Soul to Keep, and The Good House. She and her late mother, civil rights activist Patricia Stevens Due, co-authored Freedom in the Family, a mother-daughter memoir in the fight for civil rights. She was an executive producer on Shudder's groundbreaking documentary, Horror Noir, A History of Black Horror. She and her husband/collaborator, Stephen Barnes, wrote A Small Town for season 2 of season 2 of Jordan Peele's The Twilight Zone on Paramount Plus, and 2 segments of Shudder's anthology film, Horror Noir. They also co-wrote their Black horror graphic novel, The Keeper, illustrated by Marco Finnegan. Due and Barnes co-host a podcast, Life Writing, Write Your Life. She and her husband live with their son, Jason, and she's currently working on a book called Bear Creek Lodge, which she describes as a snowy and secluded novel.
That is an impressive list of accomplishments in a variety of things. And sometimes I just feel like I'm just doing enough just getting stuff for the podcast.
Absolutely.
And also, if you haven't seen Horror Noirs on Shudder, it's the horror streaming service. But sometimes it'll pop up in other places. Like I think it's been on Amazon. It's one, as far as like a documentary about the history of black horror, particularly black film horror, it's a really good one to check out. And it's a good introduction to horror, black horror. So, so we'll be looking at The Good House from 2003. So this book's 22 years old now. It's kind of for someone like me who was younger in the early 2000s. Some of this stuff takes me back. It's like, oh, they're cell phones, but they're not smartphones, and travel and just the way the world is kind of depicted.
And yet, I think it still feels timeless.
Yeah. I was thinking also there's parts where, there's a character who works for the Oakland Raiders, which are no longer the Oakland Raiders, and they watch Sports Center, which is something that they really don't have anymore because we can find out the scores very easily now. But it does have that kind of, it feels of its time and also timeless, which I think is any good work.
As a non-sports person, neither of those things would have tipped me off to the era.
Yeah, no, I remember as something like, there's parts in it, and this is a side note before I get to the end, there are parts of it where they're like watching Sports Center, and that used to be a big thing. Like you go and watch Sports Center, they're looking at highlights and things like that, where now you can find these things on your phone and all's good. Anyway, to give a summary for The Good House. Angela's grandmother Maria's house, known as the Good House, has long been considered a place of magic. Hoping to save her marriage, Angela moves her family in, only to be met with an unthinkable tragedy. Years later, with buyers interested in the house, Angela's friend Naomi encourages her to return before deciding to sell. But as Angela steps back into the Good House, she is forced to confront not only her grief, but also the dark supernatural forces tied to her family's past. Told through multiple timelines and perspectives, The Good House unravels the secrets of Maria's legacy, the power she wielded, and the deadly consequences of a curse that refuses to be forgotten. As Angela digs deeper, she must uncover the truth before history repeats itself. That is, there's a lot going on in this novel, to say the least. So,
before we get into our opinions, I would like to highlight some Black creators in the book space, because when I was doing research, I found a lot of white voices being uplifted. So I just wanted to give a shout out to a couple of Black YouTubers that I've seen talk about this book, and other Black horror or Black fiction novels. The first one is called Loc'd Booktician. She has done like a discussion. She has an hour-long discussion. She has a review, and I will put in the description a link to her guide. She actually made a video of all of Tananarive Due's books, going from least spooky to most spooky. And The Good House was the second most spooky.
oh, okay.
So if you're interested, if you like this and you want to see what else, but you might not want such a hardcore story, the Loc'd Booktician is a great place. Some other places that I watched to get some ideas about how to talk about this book was the Cozy Little Book Club, Katrina Reads, and The Broken Spine. All of those are on YouTube, and we will make sure to link those down in the description.
I think she's simply seems to be a writer that's definitely, it's absurd to say she's up and coming, but she's really kind of busting out. One of her most recent novels, The Reformer, I saw it in a Kroger when I was shopping. It was on the shelf with all the, romances and magazines that are still magazines. So it's like that's getting to a lot of places.
I think it's also highlighting this place where horror has always stood as something very subversive. We're in really hard times right now, especially I can't imagine how communities of color are feeling and coping. And yet here we see this book from a proudly Black author about, I'm pretty sure the Reformatory is about Jim Crow era and the things that were done to bad Black kids.
Yeah.
The places they were sent. And what a dichotomy it is that book will be at Kroger in such a time.
Yeah, indeed. And, she's been a very productive, this is the first time this was on the list. I was very interested, obviously. And it was the first book I'd ever read of hers. So, and then there's she's got a whole career of work that's out there to check out.
Absolutely.
So yeah, about the Good House. What were some of your kind of thoughts, themes, ideas?
I thought it was long, but I thought that every word needed to be there. I think this book takes place in Washington State, and yet the vibe is so Creole still. She does a great job of moving that culture and that way of speaking to Washington State. I also listened to it in an audiobook, and the woman who narrated it did a really great job with the Creole accents. So I don't know how much that added to it, but I really I love the atmosphere, and even though this book gets very dark, it's very hopeful.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes I think the characters suffer. So many characters suffer so much that it's somewhat you just gotta end on a somewhat upbeat note. They've just suffered too much.
One of the biggest complaints I saw about this book was the ending, and we're not going to get into it yet. We'll wait until the spoiler version. But I really felt like it was a deserved, earned ending. We'll get more into that, but I definitely, some people apparently disagreed that they did not think the ending was all of that, but I thought that it left the book, everything you've been through, you're like, okay.
I mean, also endings are hard, and endings it's hard to, however good something is. I always think endings are slightly overrated in the same sense that openings are slightly overrated. Although I think for a writer, if you don't have a good opening, then nobody's going to want to publish your book. If it's not a killer, nobody's going to buy the book. If it's just something that sticks, something that really kind of gets you hooked. But endings certainly can be a little more. It is that Goldilocks zone of like when's the right place to end it, or you keep going on, or you're like the end of Lord of the Rings and Return of the King, where it's so many endings. Those are necessary, but it does kind of drag things out a little bit. So they're always hard to do, and I think it's rare to have those like, that's a perfect ending. That's something that's rare in literature, movies, all of those things. So,
but I will also say there are parts of this book that even listening to were very hard to get through, especially. If you are sensitive to child sexual exploitation, just know that beware. Just be careful with it.
Yeah, this is definitely as far as content. If it would be hard R just for just the subject matter and the topics and the character behaviors. Yeah, it is that. I mean, it is a book for adults.
Yeah, absolutely.
Or curious teenagers who want to see something that's subversive and provocative and all those things.
I will say this book very much reinforced my child-free status.
Yeah. I mean, I think this is one of the appeals of the book is that there's this kind of the small town life of Sacagawea.
Yeah, I think that's correct.
Yeah. I've heard it pronounced multiple ways, and also like on the internet, people will totally mispronounce things that I've not been used to seeing, and it just confuses me. But that whole history, the town is named after not a native person from there, a native person who was traveling through with the very white Corps of Discovery, on a colonialist exploitation scouting trip, basically. And she was just passing through the Columbia River. But it has this kind of, we're going to name it after her because it is our connection to the land when, she's someone that was far, far to the east of that. And I think one of the things, as someone who has visited the Pacific Northwest several times, I think the book, and I think there's something like Due was born in Florida and had moved to Washington, and it feels a little bit like this is my novel. Like, hey, I'm living in Washington now, and I like it here. So there's a kind of like a tribute to the place, and it kind of I suspect it gave her like a new way of thinking about horror, a new story to tell, because it is a place, contrary to popular belief, it actually is sunny there some months out of the year. Very sunny. There's kind of a dry season in the summer, and it's just the sun is so bright. I can't take it. My lily white skin and eyes cannot take it. But that sense of like you're this small town inside the Columbia River Gorge, that sense of being hemmed in, that sense of being trapped, limitations, that small town claustrophobia. It talks about the grapevine that happens. So I think she really captures that. The kind of like she captures that really well, but also she has like that aspect of the transplant. She's taking some of the characters where they go, their culture comes with them. Like in the case of
Marie.
Marie, yes, Marie Toussaint, the matriarch of the family. So,
I agree. I enjoy because it's told in multiple timelines. We get a look at the townspeople when Marie lived there versus the townspeople when they moved back twice.
yeah,
And I thought that was really interesting. And I noticed they have very different experiences. And I wonder how much of that goes back to the sacrifice Marie made in 1920. Because, we see that they blow her door down all the time. They don't kill her, but they're definitely shooting at her house. And they do not like that she's there, but they always come running to her for help.
yeah. Most infuriating position to be in if you're that person that's like, y'all hate me, but you keep calling when you need me.
I feel like that's almost Black history wrapped up.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. There's the quote. I think it's Janie's grandmother says in Their Eyes Were Watching God, Zora Neale Hurston's masterpiece. A black woman is the mule of the world. Like this is somebody
Absolutely.
who's just going to have to endure a lot of crap. And a lot of struggle, and that I think too. You also see the ways in which the black women in the book are really kind of hard scrubbed. They've kind of clawed their way into things. They've fought for their positions that they're in.
Absolutely. Yeah, I just thought that made a very interesting dichotomy, and I feel like this was written at a much more hopeful time.
Yeah,
than we're
yeah, no
in
doubt.
This was published 5 years before Barack Obama was elected.
Yeah.
And yet I still get a much more hopeful feeling about the direction we were headed then.
Yeah, maybe it was just like Hangover from the '90s or something. Like it seems such a simpler. As someone who grew up in the '90s, it seems such a simpler time than the times we live in now.
Absolutely.
So it has, in some ways, the book has that kind of nostalgic vibe to it for sure.
But yeah, and that's something that we see over and over in the book are black women being sacrificed to protect white towns, white women, and white communities.
Yeah.
And it made me reminisce about like the history of birth control. That white women weren't the ones being tested on. It was black women and Puerto Rican women. And that's just what it put me in mind of when reading about
Yeah.
passing the problems down to their daughters.
Yeah. It's kind of in our notes. You talked about like kind of generational traumas passing. I mean, it is just something that is passed down from generation to generation.
And in this book, it takes the form of a demon,
Yes, a demon, a nasty demon,
a baka.
the bad spirit. The Baka, who is in this form of this somewhat odd-smelling, homeless, hobo-y white girl named Becca.
She is certainly something. But her being the demon really leads to like this matriarchal. We get that it's the whole society is very matriarchal, at least in the way Marie comes through. I don't know. I really like that this is a story of women and black women specifically,
Yeah.
and how we handle our histories, the things we choose to discuss.
It oddly made me think of like, the 19th century into the early 20th. You had kind of American regionalism, and there was a lot of women authors. Willa Cather, you could say, is part of that tradition. Sarah Orme Jewett with The Country of the Poor and Furs. These kind of very much set in particular places where authors had lived there a significant part of their lives and wrote about that place, and often would have women as the main characters in these stories. And so it has not surprising this is someone who's a scholar and a professor that would kind of throw back to that as well as a kind of a way in like what if there were African American women authors that were able to tell these kind of stories, and what would it look like, and what if there was a horror element thrown into it. It wouldn't be these kind of idyllic places. Obviously there's a beauty to the place, don't get me wrong, but there is like it like the forest, the Maria's property. It feels like something out of a Nathaniel Hawthorne novel. It is not the pleasant natural environs of the woods where you commune with nature. There are sinister things there that will get you, and you don't need to fall into the temptation of them. That kind of thing. So
I wanted to say one more word about parallels, at least one more word, but for right now, between the past, Marie's past, and Angela's present. I found it really interesting. So we know that Marie ends up with the only other non-white person, a Native American man named John. And then we see that Angela also ended up with the only non-white person in her town. And then she leaves and she comes back and she's still drawn to him. And I wondered how much of that is you're the only one that understands. Like less of a conscious choice and more of a this is my only community here.
yeah, I mean, this really feels like this is just it's for the sake of the community. We must have the minorities pair off to keep the status quo and keep balance.
And far off on the hill.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, it reminds me of like I don't know, maybe seeing like Charlie Brown cartoons, and if it's Franklin, I don't know if he was. I can't remember if he was dancing with one of the white kids or somebody else. It was one of these things like we can't have that kind of thing. I remember something on when I was listening to talk radio. Sometimes I listen to it, but I remember when I was listening to it in Georgia and how they very specifically in the 70s would not put a black anchor with a white woman anchor doing the evening news, like the local evening news, because we will suspect something, and see how much that gets kind of thrown out. Because earlier Maria is living with Elijah Good, and just the speculation that hey, they're up to something. Which of course they eventually do get. They intertwine business as business associates and ultimately as kind of partners in all senses of the word. So there are these things but no matter what that black characters are going to do, they're going to suspect the worst just out of hand about them, and that they're a threat. And it seems like later in the book that people are more accepting, but it's easy to think like, oh, Angela's got miles she can be with, and kind of thing.
Also, I get the vibe that they're the good ones.
Yes.
I don't say that from my point of view, but just the way the people act. I mean, much better than shooting down their door, I guess, but still very microaggressive.
Yeah.
Not very accepting. I mean, there's a section where Corey, the son, talks about how he acts black. So he doesn't act the way he normally does because he's facing so much racial. So it's also very different from what the kids are experiencing versus the adults.
Yeah, very much. Yeah, it's this kind of I believe what they call like the model minorities, or a credit to their race. So these are all these like they sound nice, but they're very underhanded undercurrent of racist terms to them. And I do think one of the things is that there's a kind of I feel like Angela and her grandmother can kind of negotiate these things because they're women and they're not as threatening, and also that people people went to Maria for help. But there is this streak of, I would say, where some of the male characters, Tariq and Corey in particular, that they seem to fall into this kind of what we would stereotypically associate was like a violent black man, and doesn't necessarily, it's not their whole personality, but it's something that crops up. I think particularly with Corey, where he feels the need to perform this kind of thing because not that he wants to play this kind of hard-bitten teenager, but actually he does it as a survival mechanism at one point, because you've got these white kids, they're throwing the expected racist slurs at him, and he just tries to act as hard as he can to scare them. And that he notices he gets a response for that. So this is a culture, and the teenagers are they're much more bold and open with their racism. And you could say the older people are maybe a little more subtle, or it's ingrained and they're almost unconscious of it if you're being nice about it. But
I almost feel like the townsfolk have that fake Southern nice, if you know what I mean by fake Southern nice.
Well, I mean, also, let's just not forget someone that grew up in the South. There was racism everywhere.
Absolutely.
And even in like efforts of the civil rights movement to kind of get rights for African Americans in the South, rural places, there was a lot of that going on. I mean, again, where this takes place is not that far from Portland. And Portland, Oregon, you think it's on the left coast. It's very liberal and open. It's some of the worst racist history as far as like being exclusionary and segregationist. So the South was bad, but also there's a lot of, every region has its particular history and past and burden of racism that it needs to work through.
Absolutely. I think I want to return back to your discussion of Tariq as the violent black man. And I noticed that your notes talk about how it parallels Stephen King's The Shining. And I think it's interesting that we don't talk about Jack Torrance as a violent white man.
Yeah.
Like I don't mean us, I mean as a society, we don't need to say, oh, look at that violent white man. Yeah. His race isn't as critical to the conversation. Please know if you're listening, I'm using air quotes around the word critical. And I just thought that was an interesting difference there, just in the way that we as a society discuss these characters and the way that these characteristics are highlighted about them.
And I think too, it's the way in which Tariq tends to, and it's like he's been possessed, like the spirit has been working on him for a while, to be to be like a vessel and like it was vampiric. Hence, I think there's clear parallels here to something like Salem's Lot and The Shining. But it's weird because I think the novel does a really good job of showing different sides of characters. The goofy side, the awkward side, the thoughtful side, the egotistical, the full of themselves, the violent. You get a nice cross section of these characters, and to me it feels like a lot like Tariq is just falling into like the demon itself is falling into race, is making him fall into racist stereotypes. That like this is what the demon like it's like how AI is racist sometimes it's because the programmers and the information. So the demon is racist, right? And the demon thing, this is what I assume a violent black man is going to be, and forces him into that, and kind of possesses him into that kind of behavior.
I think it also highlights another truth about our society, is that through the spirit working on him for so long, we're not sitting here talking about how strong he was for months.
Yeah.
We're talking about the one time he lost it.
Yeah.
And this idea that you can be, I'll use Will Smith in The Slap, you can be an upstanding black member of society, black excellence, and one moment after years of taking it.
Yeah.
And suddenly you're every bad thing that they ever thought. And I thought that was interesting about Tariq.
Yeah, I think Tariq is a complicated character. He's very possessive. Just say that.
I wanted Tariq to win for himself.
Yeah.
I didn't particularly like him, because he was kind of misogynistic.
Kind of.
I'm trying to be
polite.
But I also felt like with his character, like with Jack Torrance, you were like, can he redeem him? Like, is he going to be the person who saves them at the end?
Yeah, like I want him to do the right thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I also think he's someone that I think he has an extraordinary amount of confidence, which I think is always appealing, like someone that's very confident. Like he just strolls back into Sacagawea to like kind of win his family back. And there's just such a confidence and an arrogance to him, and it's the kind of thing where like I think you as the reader like immediately pick up on that. Like you see his appealing thing, but then you see like his negatives too. So he's a real mixed bag, and yeah.
And then another thing that I found interesting with like Tariq and Angela and Tariq's nephew, who is also a pro ball player. I think back to one of my favorite movies of all time is The Freedom Riders. And one of the students say something like, who around us, who like me do you see out here that makes money, who's not dribbling a ball or rapping a lyric? And I thought that it was really interesting that both Tariq and Angela are in sports and entertainment business. So like, what is it saying about the paths that Black people have to those types of positions
Yeah.
out of poverty?
Well, I would say it's a little bit like, I don't know, they used to have these commercials where it was like you go into somewhere to learn about the music industry. There's all these other jobs aside from performing on stage that you can do, that you can be paid sometimes better than the people who are actually making the stuff. And you can see, and this is not uncommon, it's someone that plays college in sports. This is why a lot of them will go into like accounting or business if you're like a college athlete, or education. But you'll do something that when you get out, you could potentially work for a college in some sort of administrative or some up the level or professional team, because hey, you knew what it was like, and you know that culture, and you can kind of rise. And it seems like what's Tyreek's done. He seemed to have a good plan B. Like he's working for he's in a particular part. He's clearly accrued a lot of sick time, so he's been there for a while. And yeah, and then Angela is kind of there, not as the movie star, but she's there supporting the movie stars, getting them as big a payday as she can when trying to. She's wheeling and dealing in those things, and so it shows not the stars, but you can be extremely well compensated, because clearly Angela's doing pretty good with her job.
And we see that Angela is focused on helping other Black women rise through her privilege, I guess, of having money.
Yeah.
That her focus is a Black starlet. And I have to say, I loved Naomi.
Yes. That's
Her character, I thought, brought so much some comedic relief, but also was just a good, solid friend for Angela. And I thought that was an interesting conversation of where is our line between professionalism and friend?
Yeah. And it's something that even brought up by one of her assistants talking. It's like that there's this crunch getting her to Naomi wanting to be a friend to Angela, and then like Angela wanting her to like do her job so she can get paid the 10% as the agent fee. And also there's just I think in a lot of ways, like Naomi as a character is allowed to give us a lot of straight talk, because like she gets $1 million payday for doing a role in Vancouver, which they go there for tax reasons, so they shoot a lot of films there. And the funny thing that I thought was like, she has to basically be the romantic the romantic love interest for this older white guy. So it's just like, here's the crow you have to eat to get to get that $1 million.
Was this published around the time of Monsters Ball?
Yeah, that would have been around that time.
Because I didn't know if this was a call to Halle Berry.
I don't know. That might make sense. I hadn't thought about it like that. Of course, I really like that film, and I think in a weird way, certainly Halle Berry has aged very gracefully, and strangely, Billy Bob Thornton has is like he's a sexy pirate or something like that.
He did all of his aging in his 30s.
Yeah, that's usually what you get old. There's some point where you get old and you just look like that for the next 30 years. So it's just where is it going to happen? So yeah.
Absolutely. One of the other things that I wanted to bring up, and it was something that the Loc'd Booktician actually talked about in her live discussing this book. She talked about in Black communities how there is this idea of we don't talk about how painful the past was. And in that discussion, she was wondering, like, is that why Marie didn't better prepare Angela for the supernatural things that she was going to face? And that was a critique that the Loc'd Booktician had about the Black community that she thinks Tananarive Due was also hinting at, or not even hinting at, was the things that we're not saying are the things that are continuing to hurt us
Yeah.
over and over and over again. Can we go ahead and get into spoilers?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Because I wonder, we know at the end that it is Angela and Corey who come together to end this family curse. Why couldn't it have been Marie and Angela? I also feel like I'm very fortunate. I've read books, fictional books, but that have involved voodoo before. So like Papa Legba and all that was not new to me. It was not an unknown.
This is a
I
new
had-
experience for me, so yeah.
I kind of knew these spirits, at least in a fictional sense.
Yeah. And every book's going to probably have a little, change things up a little bit here and there for they're telling a story. I think ultimately it is Angela's story, and it's her grief, and that's a way to kind of close the circle. And since that Corey is the one who actually starts to piece things together about it, so it makes sense. And I guess everybody, like the land, everything is at peace now, kind of thing.
Because we have several times Angela like, why didn't she tell me? Like, why?
Yeah.
And I thought that I was like thinking of all of the possibilities for why Marie wouldn't tell her, because I don't think it was negligence. And I wonder, did she think that Papa Legba would protect her family if she took out the magic herself? By not teaching her next lines the magic, would Papa Legba spare the family line because there's no more spirit workers?
I think about trauma and skipping generations, and this seems totally off but relevant. I remember there was it West Georgia, and there was a Holocaust survivor that was like, there was this play which was kind of this play about the Holocaust. So okay, that's a little, how can you do a play about the Holocaust? It was like a little skits. And then it was the woman, it was her father, her mother, and her mother ended up marrying Anne Frank's dad.
Okay, Otto.
Yeah, Otto Frank. And she was there, and I was like, it was like 2000, like, oh my gosh. These are, she survived, family members had survived. And one of the things that she said growing up in that time was that family members who were Nazis did not tell their children a damn thing. And that oftentimes what happened was that these children would go talk to Jewish people who had survived the Holocaust, that they like, what's going on here? They ain't telling us shit. What do we do? And so they talked to them to finally, and I think in some ways, not to be sympathetic to the Nazis, because they did very, very bad. They allowed very bad things. That they did very, very bad things. We should stomp out fascism wherever it's at.
Absolutely.
Okay, that goes without saying here. I just want to be clear. But there was obviously a guilt with them and a shame, and they didn't want to. But yeah, it's the thing that the silence is the thing that perpetuates things. You think, I don't talk about it. And I think there's also this. Oh, go ahead. You were.
No, you're okay. I'll just say, I think with the Nazis, I think a lot of it was also saving face.
Yes.
And that's one big difference. Was it shame for what you did, or was it shame because you got caught?
Both.
Right.
Yeah, or that you didn't do enough. And so I feel like this is a bad example. I do those all the time when I teach. But that sense of, in the power, the trauma, forgetting versus confronting the trauma, which one do you think is easier for the person that dealt with the trauma?
Yeah.
And wouldn't we think, oh, we don't talk about that. We don't talk about that. I don't want to share that with you. There are things like you watch something, you see something traumatic, even if something you see on the TV or something you experience, I think there's this impulse to share that with someone, just to be like, I'm not the only person I want. But also there's like this guilt of like, I'm gonna mess them up I'm gonna mess them up in a little bit if I tell them about this, or somebody dies or something horrific. And so I think there's that silence, but also I think this seems to be this general type of story. We see this in things like Appalachian literature as well, which is the region Appalachia's the region where we're coming out of, where there's kind of like the generation that is connected to the earth, connected to the world, connected to the magic. And then there's the next generation that seems to want to modernize, to assimilate. And then in that stuff gets lost. And so we see Corey's curiosity in wanting, he's like, oh, I have stupid chores to do. But then he like really gets into like, what is all this stuff? And what is this hoarder situation? I'm so glad she hoarded, because there's all this richness and stuff I had no idea about. And that younger generation is a generation you can connect with because they've been denied it so much. They've been denied that past and that history.
Bringing up Appalachian Lit, I also think that's something in Appalachian Lit that is we don't talk.
Mm-hmm.
Something bad happened, but we're not going to talk about it. We're not going to handle that trauma.
And if you've watched any melodramatic play before, this is where the problems start. That nobody wants to talk about the problem. And this is, and this is a theme as old as time. Get to the point of that, and that's certainly something that is pervasive in this novel.
Absolutely.
And how it just, it also like infects everybody else in the process. So it is a danger.
About how trauma can spread even if you're not the direct person affected by the trauma.
Yeah.
Now, if we can, I just want to turn a little bit. I thought one of the most frustrating parts about this book was that sometimes it was a little unclear, because at least unless I missed something while listening, the whole issue ended up being that Marie misused Papa Legba's word. And so in my brain, I'm like, okay, is that how she unpossessed the girl she saved? But then, I don't know. I want to know, like, how all of that was actually connected.
Mm-hmm.
Did Papa Legba say, okay, I'll save this girl, but it'll be a curse on your family because you've hurt our community to save a white woman?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I would have loved just a little more clarity about what exactly Marie did that caused this.
She was. Okay, was she being black while helping? Was that? It seems a little bit like that.
True.
I mean, she's trying to do something good, but she just happens like that. So we must be punished for it. That's a terrible thing. But I think there's something to do with that. But also that this, and I think too, there's a lot of stuff in the book. I was kind of thinking about sections or passages where it feels like she's in Angela's in the house, and there's just kind of like this, like something's bubbling up, something's like feels like something's rattling, or the leaves or the mud coming up, which is very much a prominent motif in the book. That's just this stuff that it is like, I wouldn't say it's not an eldritch horror, but it's like it, right? Like it goes down for a while and then it comes back up to wreak havoc, kind of thing. So it is this kind of slumbering horror that will come up at the worst time you could think it would, and to take another person, to take someone you love,
like a slow festering wound that's slowly.
Yeah, it never heals. It never gets better. I mean, you have the racist character Bo just gets sucked down into the land, which it's like, oh, we'll miss him. No, not really.
You mentioned earlier it's like a vampire, and I was thinking about how Tariq is similar to Renfield.
Mm-hmm.
That many from Sacagawea to Oakland, California, it's finally strong enough to control him completely that far away, to get him to do the bidding that, I guess, because it can't leave Sacagawea, but it can reach out.
Yeah.
So I thought that was
I
awesome.
hadn't thought about that, but yeah. And also with that, it's playing into something they talked about in Horror Noir, the documentary about how usually you think in like slasher films or horror films, it's the black character who dies first, and that's not necessarily the case, and that it's more that the death of the black character represents the strength of the monster, and that the fact that this big, strong, confident, former football playing, very kind of macho black guy gets seduced by, gets sucked in by it, shows the power of this.
I also think, but is it sucked in through his refusal to be vulnerable? Therefore, it can find his cracks by
Yeah.
hurting those places and the things that he won't talk about.
Yeah, because he is this. This is a book that certainly is very good, and I feel like this is something like a lot of horror films. Like, y'all people need therapy, and this is one that I think it doesn't go that much, but it does kind of address. There's Miles, and like it doesn't work out with Angela, so he ends up marrying somebody who's like, this is kind of like Angela. And bad things happen. And he's like, I was in therapy for 3 years, 3 years trying to work this stuff out. And he seems like more or less he's in a good place and that Angela's working through things. It seems one that seems to acknowledge, like, hey, it can help.
I don't know. I think if he was in such a good place, he wouldn't have come running back to Angela like his little.
Again, we wouldn't have much of a story. We fall into those temptations. And, she's basically throwing herself at him. I mean, come on, she seems like an appealing lady. Yeah, she's, yeah, I understand. I understand.
I've been fortunate enough to never have been into the position where I need to save my marriage.
Yeah.
But at least for Angela, even though they're still sleeping together every now and then, like she's pretty decided that it's done. It's over.
She seems very much like, I think it is that also that kind of thing of like her career versus family, which is kind of a frustrating debate. It's just a frustrating binary, but she very much does seem to be focused on her career, and also like it's her child, her career, 1A, 1B, and then anything else is there. So she's kind of focused on those things. Tariq is a convenience. It's nice to have him around. Mm-hmm. Angela has needs.
For sure.
So, yeah.
All right.
I think one thing I do want is something that maybe it was something you had mentioned from some of the podcasts talking about certain parallels between Stephen King.
Yeah.
This is the same thing as Stephen King's novels are complicated and have lots of references. This is the same thing. So this is just a part of it. But yeah, I was thinking, there was like obviously like The Shining with the house, the hotel, the demons taking, we need something, give us something.
The men specifically.
Yeah, they were really going after the guys. And then Salem's Lot, which when we discussed, I read that one before I got around to The Shining, which is an excellent book. But it kind of is an interesting book in that it's a vampire story, but put the vampire stuff to the side. That it's got a real appeal for this, like, how does a small town get taken over? And I think that is the spirit of that. I don't know if it's conscious or not by the author, or the author had any knowledge of it. Read Stephen King before. It feels like one of those, you've probably read something by Stephen King. But that slow creeping takeover of a town by some entity of some sort, and how it changes people, and how there's something that's very, very sinister about that's very, very much to Stephen King's right. Like there's something very sinister about this small town in Maine, and you can relate that to a lot of different towns. Even though it's on the other side of the country, it definitely has that ever-present dread that's in some of his small town novels is very much something that is there, and you just kind of feel it's oppressive about it. And the added inflection of you have a woman character, a black woman, and it's not a situation where she is an insider to this town, but she is also an outsider of this town. She knows this town well, but she never quite really fits in, just simply because of her racial identity and who her grandmother and her mother was. So it's just this very it's very claustrophobic because I didn't quite know where this would be set on the more forested part of it, but it's like it's very you've got the gorge and then you're kind of surrounded, like you're at the bottom of a gorge, so the tight roads and everything. So it is something that is super extra trapped. If people that may be listening from West Virginia, if you've driven like US 60 between Charleston and Fayetteville, as it gets more and more narrow and those little towns keep hanging on to the sides of like the Kanawha River Valley and things like that. So yeah, someone should write about those towns and how horrible they are and what horrors could come out of the cities and towns in the New River Gorge or the Kanawha River Valley. I think there could be a lot of good things from writers like Due and King to adapt for that. So.
Absolutely.
All right.
What did you think about the ending? I've talked about my feelings on the ending. What did you think to close us out?
Again, I think just characters suffer so much. Just let it go. That's kind of my feeling about it. I'm like cool with like, and I think particularly, I don't know, with like tragedies, they're like good moments, and like this is, I think we kind of like you do the 1 to 100. So like Angela's starting out very, very low. She's like at a 0, and then she goes like negative, and she kind of pops out, So I think it just, I cannot, and I'm someone who likes cynical, dark, and depressing books, but there's only so much I can take. When you have a character suffer, and generationally a family suffer so much, you kind of want them to have a little bit of a hopeful ending. It doesn't have to be naturalism or anything like that. It doesn't have to be what was that movie? What was that book? Sinclair Lewis. I can't remember. It was about the meatpacking industry. That was just
The Jungle.
The Jungle.
Upton Sinclair.
Upton Sinclair. Yeah, totally different authors there. Upton Sinclair. That's a dark ending. It just ends in a kind of socialist screed at the end, which is admittedly is.
I understand why people don't like the ending because it does feel like she just got to hit a big redo button. But I think that that's ignoring the journey that she did grow. She did learn not just of her family's trauma, but how to be a better listener, how to invite people to talk about those things that maybe hurt to talk about. So I think that to say that she just got to redo and that it was like I said, I felt the ending was earned. Is it my favorite kind of? And then it was a dream. Of course not. But at least what she did go through something. She did grow and change as a person, and we see that even when she goes back.
Yeah, and also it makes me kind of wonder is like this gets at such like kind of historical and institutional and cultural racism that perhaps we need a redo. Like we need something to just kind of start things over again. So it also is like that's the cynical way of reading the endings. Like this might be a good thing, but we're never gonna have this, are we? We're never gonna have a redo.
We can hope for the great replacement.
The great replacement. Yes. Well, let's just hope that intellectual curiosity and academic rigor and intellectual exploration just somehow endure in our dark, dark times.
Absolutely. Well, good luck out there.
Yeah, hang in there. Take care.